Hey guys, Richard Holder here. It's Turbo Tuesday, so I'm very excited. This video is all about the S480 Borg Warner Turbo run-on. 4 different combinations, but since it's Turbo Tuesday, join me tonight live on YouTube, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, California time. Let's talk turbos Q&A session. In this video, we're going to take a look at a very popular S480 turbo on 4 different engine combinations: the 4.8 liter, a 5.3 liter, a 6.0, and a big block 454. Now, the S480 is an awesome turbo. It works very well, especially for 4-digit power levels. But can it actually work on all these combinations? You guys get to decide, so let's check it out. First combination we ran the S480 Borg Warner turbo from LJMS on was actually a 4.8 liter. And while normally we try to size the turbo to make it work well, this was actually a time when we were doing exactly the opposite. On the 4.8 liter, what I was trying to demonstrate, and I have a video up on this already, it's right here. I'll put the link up, you can check that out. But what I was trying to do was put together a combination to demonstrate what happens when you don't get your combination right. How bad the combination can be, despite the fact that you've added a turbo, a good-sized turbo, a good turbo also in the S480. But when you don't do it right, it doesn't make good power. So what I did was configure a 4.8 that was going to be all wrong for the combination, and that included the S480 turbo. Not that there's anything wrong with that turbo. It works well on a 4.8 if you're trying to make a lot of power. Now, for the 4.8, what I did was we started out obviously with a 4.8, so it had not much displacement. I also put the wrong cam, the wrong cylinder heads, and the wrong intake manifold on it. In this case, we ran a set of 317 heads, so low compression on a 4.8, not a good idea. Also, we ran the wrong camshaft, and that was a blower cam, and I'll go ahead and put the specs up here, but it was a positive displacement blower cam, which has a wide LSA, which tends to be very soft down low and in the middle, and then it's designed to make power at the top of the RPM range. And the reason that they do that is on a positive displacement blower, they have a lot of immediate boost down low and in the middle, so they think that if they're enhancing the power output up top where the roots blower or positive displacement blower might be a little soft, that's why they do that. For me, I would rather have an NA cam on that application also, because I think it works better. But that's the cam that we ran because we knew it was the wrong one for this application. And then I combined that with a fabricated sheet metal intake, the Race Sniper, a short runner intake. So we had a short runner intake, we had the wrong camshaft, we had low compression cylinder heads, and we had a 4.8. And then we added an S480 turbo to that when we ran it under boost, and that combination proved to kind of be all wrong. And what we did to cure that was to make the combination right, or at least more representative of what guys that have these 4.8s would run, or that they should run. So what we did was put a set of stock 706 heads back on it, replacing the 317s. We put a stage 2 cam. In this particular case, it was one from Brian Tooley Racing, and I'll go ahead and put the specs up here and you guys can take a look at that. And we also replaced the Race Sniper, the short runner Race Sniper intake, with the factory truck intake. So it's more like what a guy would run, a stock 706 head from the wrecking yard, with valve springs in it, the stock truck intake, a stage 2 cam of almost any type works well. And then we also replaced the turbo. We put an S475 turbo on it. And not that the S475 is a better turbo than the S480. In fact, the S480, especially the billet wheel version that we ran, would ultimately make more power if that's what you were trying to do. But in the power range that we ran this combination on, it just has more than enough flow to support this power level. So here was our NA power curve when we had the Race Sniper and the 317s and the blower cam on it. It made 393 horsepower and 323 foot-pounds. And here is our NA combination when we put it together with the truck intake, the 706 heads, and the stage 2 turbo cam on it. And you can see, while the peak power is similar, I mean, this thing made 407. Take a look at the peak torque, 363 foot-pounds. Basically, when you get the combination right, it even if it doesn't make a lot more peak power, which it was a little bit more here, it makes a lot more average power everywhere. And as you'll see, that has a really big effect on the boost curve and how much power that this thing makes with the right turbo on it. So this is our NA combination. These are our 2 NA combinations. Now let's take a look and see what happened when we added boost to this. So now let's take a look and see what happened when we added our S480 Borg Warner Turbo. And for you guys that are looking for the specs on this, this obviously was an 80mm wheel. It was a billet wheel, so it was an upgrade. It had a 96mm turbine on it. It had a 1.25 AR, so it was a good size. And it was actually sized so that we could run it as a single on a 5.3 liter. This particular turbo belonged to Freiberger, and we've used it, and we'll show you. We used it on a 5.3 of his with forged internals and stuff on it for a bunch of testing. But it was sized for a single, as opposed to the S475 that we're going to show you. That was actually designed to be run as twins, and it's one of the twins that we ran on all the Big Bang motors, so it worked really well. But here's what happened when we added the S480. And this shows that it was 11.4 pounds, although that doesn't seem like it's very much power for 11.5 pounds. 634 or 5 horsepower. And peak torque was 508 foot-pounds of torque. But again, if you didn't have anything to compare this to, you'd think, okay, we had a LS, a modified LS, we add a boost to it, it's making good power, we just keep turning the boost up, and we keep making more power. But here's what happened when we ran our, basically the other combination, when we ran the modified 4.8 with the stock truck intake, the 706 heads, the stage 2 cam, and also an S475 turbo. So again, this isn't a direct comparison between two turbos. I was just trying to, in this particular test, show you what happens when you don't get the combination right, how poorly it can perform, basically. So here's what happened when we ran the S475, and out at the top, which is where we're kind of measuring the boost was within 1 or 2 tenths of each other. But as you can see in the S475 combination with the modified motor, it's just better everywhere. And the reason for that is, as we saw in the NA combination, the NA combination is better everywhere. It has a long runner intake. It has actually a slightly bigger cam if you measure that in terms of intake duration. It has the long runner intake and better cylinder heads. The 706 heads we know make more power than the 317 heads, and yes, they even do that under boost. Everybody gets wrapped up in the flow rate of the 317 heads, but you have a big loss in power from the change in compression. And when you're blowing through them, the additional airflow becomes almost irrelevant until you would get to the very, very top of maxing this thing out. And honestly, I don't know where that crossover point would ever be on a 317 versus a 706 head. Guys can make lots of power with a 317 head, and I think it's a good head. It doesn't matter what you have on there, you can make lots of power. And it might be arguably, you might argue the fact that a 317 head might be a better combination for running on the street. If you're running pump gas on it, maybe you can make more power with the lower compression and then more boost. But I have never tested that, so that would be actually a really interesting test. It would be kind of cool to find out, but we don't have the knock sensor technology to actually make that happen. But this goes to show you that an S480 actually can work well on a 4.8 as long as you're trying to make a lot of power in this kind of range, and actually all the way up to getting near 1,000 horsepower. The smaller S475 will support that, so it would be ultimately more responsive. And definitely when you're putting a combination together, have the combination be right before you add boost to it, regardless of what turbo you're putting on it. Because when you make the combination right and you're adding boost, it just elevates, it just multiplies what's there. And that's exactly what we had here. So now let's check out our 5.3. Our next combination that we ran the S480 turbo on was a 5.3 liter. And like the S480 turbo, this combination actually belonged to David Freiberger. This 5.3 liter was a stock block and stock crank, I believe. I know that it had forged internals in it, forged rods, and forged pistons. The forged pistons had a 10cc dish in it, so this was actually lower than stock compression. And for this first test, what we did was just equip it with stock 706 heads with valve springs in it. We put a stock truck intake manifold on it and throttle body. It also had a stock LM7 camshaft on it. So basically, this was kind of a low compression stock 5.3 liter. And what we did was run it NA first and then added a turbo system to it. And then run NA, this 5.3 liter, this low compression 5.3 produced 333 horsepower. and 360 foot-pounds of torque. So basically this was set up kind of as a turbo combination so we could add boost to it. So that's exactly what we did. What we did was install a Holley turbo setup with the cast iron manifolds and the cross under tube. We had a single Turbo Smart 45mm wastegate controlling that, and we had the Borg S480 turbo and a ProCharger air-to-water intercooler. All of this was run on E85 using a Holley HP management system. We had 120-pound injectors in it, so we had more than enough fuel to supply the needs of this power output. So here's what happened when we ran around 9.5 pounds. It jumped up to 532 horsepower. Torque was up to 555 foot-pounds. We also turned the boost up just a little bit on this stock combination and pushed the power up to 550 horsepower and 572 foot-pounds. As you can see, the power curves boosted mirror that of the NA curve, which is what we would expect. And all we've done is elevate the whole curve by multiplying it with the boost that we supplied from the turbo system. So now let's take a look and see what happened when we modified this motor with heads, cam, and intake and ran similar boost numbers on it. You can see that when we improve the power output of the NA motor, it also improves the power output of the turbo combination. So after running boost on our stock or stock-ish 5.3 liter, the low compression one, here's what happened after we did our upgrades to the NA combination to improve the power output. You can see we got big changes in power, and what we did to produce that power curve was we installed a set of TrickFlow 205 CNC heads. We changed the camshaft from the stock LM7 cam to a Brian Toohey Stage 2 cam with a 605 598 lift, 226 231 at 50 duration, and 113 plus 4 LSA. We also installed the Holley Race Sniper intake and a 92mm throttle body. And here's what happened. I mean, you can take a look at the power curve. The power output jumped up to 451 horsepower. Peak torque was 379 foot-pounds, and obviously it made peak torque and peak horsepower quite a bit higher in the RPM range because of the camshaft and short runner intake and additional head flow. So, you know, when you make more power NA, obviously you'll make more power under boost. So here's what happened when we installed the same turbo setup with the Holley cast iron exhaust manifolds and the S480 turbo. And as I pointed out, when we ran the single wastegate on this setup, we actually had a rising boost curve on this. Now we know I've run a single 45mm gate on a lot of combinations and had no trouble controlling the boost on the chassis dyno and out on the street. But a lot of times we do have trouble on the engine dyno, oddly enough, which is why when I run my setups on most of these turbo combinations, when I run the stock exhaust manifolds feeding the Y pipe that I built, we have 2 of these Turbo Smart wastegates on it, and then we have full control. But because of the way that the Holley was set up, we only ran 1 and had a rising boost curve. And I did not have a boost controller on this, although I don't think it's a controller problem because we don't have that on other applications. But here's what happened when we added boost. We made right at 800 horsepower. And 616 foot-pounds of torque, and I'll go ahead and show you kind of an overlay of what the stock turbo setup was. You know, you had a little bit more response down low. Most of that is not obviously because of the turbo or controller or anything. Most of that is because the NA combination with the long runner intake and mild camshaft and stuff makes more power down low. I'll kind of get rid of this here so we can talk about this. But when you add power NA and then you add boost to that, the gains that you get NA get multiplied under boost, so good things happen, which is exactly why, not that I would recommend putting a short runner intake manifold, certainly not in this RPM range, but this is why guys put camshafts in an LS application. Sure, you can run the stock camshaft and you can make power and it feels good, and adding boost to a stock motor and otherwise stock motor works well. But when you add a camshaft to it, you start getting really big power gains when you start adding boost. So this is how well the S480 did. It made 800 and has another 300 or 400 horsepower probably left in reserve.
You can make a lot more power, obviously, with the S480, and we just didn't take advantage of it on this, but on this 5.3, it worked well. Let's check out our next combination. Our third combination was actually a 6-liter, so we've gone from a 4.8 to a 5.3 and now to a 6-liter. And this was the original Big Bang Gen 4 motor that made 1,543 horsepower. We changed the configuration a little bit. It was a 6-liter with a stock bottom end. It was an LY6 originally, so it had stock block, crank, rods, pistons. We obviously increased the ring gap. It had a set of TrickFlow 225 heads on it. It had a Stage 3 turbo cam from Brian Tooley Racing. And it had a Dorman LS6 intake manifold and a stock throttle body. We had 83-pound injectors. We ran about 20 degrees of timing with boost. This thing ran best NA with about 29 degrees of total timing. When we ran under boost, we ran E85 fuel in it. So here is our NA combination run with long tube headers and a Holley HP management system. It produced 514 horsepower in this configuration and 465 foot-pounds of torque. So here's what happened after we installed our Borg S480 turbo. This combination had our ProCharger air-to-water intercooler that we normally run. We were running about 13 pounds of boost. And as I said, 20 degrees of timing at the power peak, less at the torque peak. This thing made 973 horsepower and 805 foot-pounds of torque. As you can see, this, and we were only at about 13 pounds on this 6-liter combination. There's a lot of power left. This was actually when I was doing testing to compare. We ran a few different intercoolers on this test, on this 6-liter. I also ran a number of different exhaust systems. If you check it out, I'll go ahead and put the link up right here where we compared the different exhaust sizes after the turbo to demonstrate what happens to the back pressure and boost pressure and the power output, because you want to try to maximize the size of the exhaust after the turbo. You want that to be big. Everything that you can do to maximize the size of the exhaust system after the turbo, and not so much before the turbo. You know, there's maybe some arguments about how big the Y pipe should be and how big the header should be and all that, but definitely there's no argument about what the size of the turbo should be after or what the size of the exhaust should be after the turbo. And we ran on this, it was a 4 or 4.5 inch exhaust. Again, even if you make a cone to make the exhaust even bigger than the outlet of the turbo is, it's always a good idea. So this was a good combination, the S480. This is a really good combination on this 6-liter for the S480, especially if you were going to turn it up. I think you could get well into the 3-digit power levels with that S480. It probably would support 11 or 1200 horsepower, I think, at the right boost level. Let's check out our final combination, which is a big block 454. Our final combination was a big block 454. It's actually the Big Bang 454, and we ran it with a single turbo instead of twins. Just kind of wanted to do, a little test on it, see how it was doing. And this combination was a Gen 6 454 from the wrecking yard. Like the other ones, we put extra ring gap in it. I topped it with a set of Dart Pro 1 heads. There are 275 oval ports, and actually I had my buddy Andy do a little porting on these, so they kind of fluffed them up a little bit. And we had an Edelbrock Victor Jr., a 454R, basically EFI manifold for port injection so that we could control the fuel to each of the cylinders. A 1000 CFM throttle body. We ran 80-pound injectors in this. This thing had a mild comp cam in it. It was a custom one, 561 lift, 233, 239 degree duration, and a wide LSA. What we were trying to do is push power out farther in the RPM range with the wider LSA. Unfortunately, we haven't been successful in doing that yet. This thing only makes peak power at 56 or 5700 RPM. I'd like it to be like 6500 RPM if we could do that, but it doesn't seem to want to cooperate. But here's our combination, and we added to our 454, we added our S480 turbo and ran it at a variety of different boost levels, because that's what we do. We start low and then add boost once we know everything is safe. And so right off the bat, adding even a little bit of boost to this thing, at around 10 pounds. It was over 800 horsepower, 818 horsepower. And here's the thing that concerns us with regard to the Big Bang stuff is that it's also making 818 foot-pounds of torque. We don't want that to happen. We want it to have a really high horsepower number and a not so high torque number. But on the single turbo on the S480, this thing is sized very well for this combination. The big block has plenty of displacement and it has plenty of torque, NA, so it makes a lot of power, and it's sized well for the S480 turbo. So here's what happened. We were running, 12 pounds, 12.6. And that's the last one we ran was 12.6. But again, we're over 900 horsepower fairly easily, 914 horsepower, but we're also at 910 foot-pounds torque. So again, we want to just push power higher out in the rev range. But on this single S480 for a 454, this combination works very well. I mean, that turbo is sized, especially for this power level. You probably could get here with an S475, but if we wanted to go to 1,000 or 11 or 1,200, then the S480 obviously would be a good choice. But this combination is working well. The S480 showed its versatility from a 4.8 to a 5.3 to a 6.0 into a 7.4. I never ran it on the on the little Honda motor. I think it might be a little bit big for that, but again, it shows versatility for the S480. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, we finished the testing on our S480 turbo, and we ran it on a 4.8 liter, a 5.3, a 6.0, and a 454, and it worked well on all of these combinations. And just like our previous testing on the other turbos, on ranging from the 2.4 liter Honda all the way up to a 454 like we did on that GT45 turbo, the same turbo isn't ideal for all of these combinations, and that's very important. Like with this S480, it's a good turbo, especially if you want to go into the 4-digit power range. It works very well. It worked very well on the 454, it works good on the 6.0, and it even can work well on a 4.8 liter, but make sure to take a look at the available hot sides for this S480. If you're going to size that S480 and you want to run it on a 4.8 liter, I would recommend a smaller turbine wheel and a tighter AR. And alternately, if you're going to run it on a 454 or a 408 or something bigger, make sure to size your turbine for that. Go with a bigger wheel and a bigger AR. So the S480 has some flexibility. It obviously has plenty of power potential. But again, make sure to size your turbo for your intended application. If you're the 1 or 2 guys out there that are actually going to run a turbo and only make 600 horsepower, because I'm going to use it for towing, and you're never going to turn the boost up, size the turbo, get a 600 horsepower turbo. But here's what I recommend for everybody else. If you're going to build an engine and I only want 600 horsepower, get an 800 horsepower turbo or a 900 horsepower turbo or maybe a 1,000 horsepower turbo, because what happens with all of us is we run the turbo and we run it and we get used to the power output at 10 pounds. So you have to be really good. Let's just go to like 12 pounds, and then 12 pounds feels really good. We take it to the track and it went faster. But you know what would be even better than 12 pounds? Like 14 or 15 pounds. And then we run it at the track and it goes even faster. And that's what happens. We get addicted to the power. We turn the boost up. So make sure, if you're not going to just only use it for towing or for one application where you're looking at a specific boost response and a specific power output, leave yourself a little bit of room to grow. I'm Richard Holder. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff, and I will keep turbo testing.